Back in the harsh winter of 1883, Clara Mae Jenkins made a brave and uncertain journey westward. She wasn't a fragile prairie blossom, like the kind written about in dime novels. Clara was strong, sunlit, and full of quiet hope. A seamstress from Illinois with a heart stitched full of dreams, Clara had spent her life making do and making beauty out of very little. But when a letter arrived from a rancher in Dry Creek, Wyoming, promising loveland and a life shared, Clara dared to believe in something more. She sold nearly everything she owned: her sewing table, her mother's cherished china, even a lace curtain she had hemmed by hand. With only her mother's quilt, her sewing kit, and a heart full of trembling faith, she boarded the train west. The skies were gray, the wind bitter, but her spirit was lit from within. She believed in the words Jedediah Turner had written. He had not spoken of beauty or appearances, only kindness, partnership, and a life built together. As the train pulled away from the station, Clara stood alone in the swirling snow of Dry Creek, holding on to hope like it was the last warm ember in the hearth. She waited for the man who had promised her a future. But what met her was not a welcome, not a smile, just a nod from a stranger who would soon say, "You're not what I expected." Still, Clara stood tall, even as her heart quietly broke. Clara didn't cry out. She didn't plead or question why she wasn't what he expected. Instead, with the quiet strength passed down from generations of women who'd carried burdens without complaint, she turned and walked away. The snow bit at her heels as she returned to the only place she knew: the empty train platform. But the train was long gone, and so was the dream she'd stitched her heart to. She had no return ticket, no family nearby, and not a single friendly face in town. Still, Clara didn't crumble. She wandered into Dry Creek, her boots soaked through her shawl, damp and clinging to her shoulders. The townspeople barely noticed her, just another woman passing through, or so they thought. But Clara was made of sterner stuff. At the edge of town above the apothecary, she found a tiny room for rent. Drafty, lonely, but it was hers. With her last bit of sewing money, Clara paid for 2 weeks on our stay. Then she went to work the only way she knew how, thread by thread. She offered mending for pennies pies in exchange for flour. She stitched not just fabric, but a new beginning. And though the whispers came, "That's the mail-order bride who got turned away," Clara stood tall. She'd been rejected, yes, but she would not be ruined. Each day, with apron tied tight and chin held high, Clara reminded Dry Creek and herself that hope didn't have to come from a man's promise. Sometimes it came from a woman's will to begin again. The heart of Dry Creek beat quietly inside the general store, where shelves lined with flower ribbons and penny candy whispered of everyday life. It was here, among the ordinary, that something extraordinary began to bloom. Clara came in often, not because she needed much, but because the store had become a place where she didn't feel invisible. She noticed him first behind the counter, tall and gentle, with eyes that didn't just look, they saw. Eli Cartwright. He wasn't loud or bold. He didn't ask questions about her past or offer pity. He simply offered her a book wrapped in brown paper and a quiet smile. "Just return it when you're done," he said softly. That gesture, small to others, felt monumental to Clara, a woman who'd been overlooked and dismissed. Their friendship unfolded like spring after a long winter. Each visit, a few more words, a laugh, a shared story. He never mentioned Jedediah or the whispers that clung to her name like dust on a windowsill. He simply listened. And in that stillness, Clara felt seen, not for what she'd been through, but for who she was. Week by week, the connection deepened. She'd leave behind a pie or a sachet of hand-sewn tea. He'd leave a new book with her name on it. There was no rush, no declarations. Just the slow, sweet unfolding of something real. A kind of companionship that wrapped around her like a quilt on a cold night. In the quiet of her upstairs room above the apothecary, Clara stitched pieces of herself back together, thread by thread, square by square. The old quilt she'd carried from Illinois wasn't just fabric and memory anymore. It had become a story of her new life in Dry Creek. She sewed into it bits of who she was, becoming a patch from the bakery's apron, a shred of her wind-worn shawl, even a corner from a ribbon Eli once admired. Each piece told a chapter, stitched in silence, stitched with hope. And when it was finished, she didn't keep it for herself. No, Clara wrapped it in brown paper and carried it to the one man who'd never made her feel like less. The bell over the general store door chimed as she stepped inside, heart thudding louder than her boots on the wooden floor. Eli looked up surprised as she gently placed the package on the counter. "I thought it might keep your chair warm," she said softly. When he unwrapped it, unfolding the layers of careful stitching, his hands trembled just a little. "No one's ever given me something like this," he whispered. Clara smiled, not with pride but with quiet courage. "No one's ever made me feel safe enough to." That moment didn't need fireworks. It didn't need a crowd. It was two hearts meeting in stillness, a gift freely given and deeply received. For Eli, the quilt wasn't just warmth, it was belonging. And for Clara, it was trust finally fully offered. The spring harvest dance was never meant to be grand, but in a town like Dry Creek, it felt like the world had dressed up just for one night. Lanterns swayed from the rafters of the old schoolhouse, casting warm light on faces weathered by time and wind. Clara arrived alone, wearing a soft lilac dress. She'd sewn herself the buttons, a creamy ivory, and her hair pinned with care. She hadn't come to dance. Not really. After all, she was still the woman who'd been left waiting on a snow-covered platform. But Eli Cartwright had a different story in mind. He stood near the punch table in a pressed shirt, spectacles perched on his nose, his eyes catching Clara's the moment she stepped inside. He didn't hesitate. He crossed the room like a man sure of something deep in his bones. "Miss Jenkins," he said gently, offering his hand, "would you dance with me?" Clara glanced around the room at the faces that once pitied her, the whispers that had followed her through winter. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'm very sure." She took his hand and the music rose around them like a tide. Their dance wasn't graceful or rehearsed, but it was honest. It was real. With each step, Clara let go of the heartbreak that brought her here and leaned into the quiet man who saw her not for her scars, but for her strength. Later, under a sky littered with stars, he whispered, "I never expected to find love here. But then you walked into my store." And Clara, whose heart had once been left in the snow, smiled, because she had finally found something worth dancing for. As spring crept quietly into Dry Creek, melting the last of the snow and coaxing blossoms from brittle branches, Clara found herself sewing late into the night by lantern light. Not just mending dresses or stitching aprons, but working on something deeply personal. Her mother's old quilt, worn and threadbare from years of use, had followed her across 1,000 miles. Now it became a canvas for Clara's own story. She added squares of gingham from the bakery apron given by Mrs. Pickens, a patch from the shawl she'd clutched on that bitter day. Jedediah turned her away, and even a piece of ribbon that Eli Cartwright once admired in passing. When the quilt was finished, Clara folded it carefully and carried it through town, hands trembling only a little. She stepped into the general store where Eli worked, placed the bundle on the counter, and softly said, "I have something for you." Eli unwrapped it with reverence, his fingers brushing the stitches with a kind of tenderness that spoke volumes. "You made this?" he asked, voice quiet with awe. Clara nodded. "It was my mama's. I just added to it. Thought maybe it could keep your chair warm." Eli looked at her, really looked, and what he saw wasn't just fabric or kindness. It was trust. It was love stitched square by square. He stepped from behind the counter, gently took her hand, and said the words she didn't even know she needed to hear. "You are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." And in that moment, Clara didn't feel like the woman left in the snow anymore. She felt seen, held, loved, as if all the broken pieces had finally been sewn into something whole again. The spring harvest dance in Dry Creek was a time-honored tradition when lanterns were strung from the schoolhouse rafters and fiddle music warmed the cool prairie night. Clara hadn't planned to dance. She arrived alone, wrapped in a lilac dress she'd sewn herself, hair pinned up, heart steady, but guarded. She only meant to watch, to feel part of something again. But Eli Cartwright had different plans. Standing near the punch table in a clean white shirt and shy smile, he spotted her the moment she stepped through the door. With quiet confidence, he crossed the room and offered his hand. "Miss Jenkins," he said with a gentle bow. "Would you dance with me?" Clara hesitated. The room was full of those who remembered her heartbreak, the whispers, the snow, the rejection. "Are you sure?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "I'm very sure," Eli replied. She placed her hand in his and they stepped onto the dance floor. The music began, a slow, tender waltz. Their movements weren't perfect, but they were real. His hand at her waist, her gaze locked with his. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to forget the pain. The sting of Jedediah's rejection, the humiliation, all faded as she moved with the man who saw her not as damaged or unwanted, but as a woman worth cherishing. Later that evening, under a starlit sky, Eli told her, "When you walked into the store, it felt like everything I thought I'd lost had come back." Clara's eyes shimmered and she whispered, "You didn't just look at me, you saw me." And in that moment, the past no longer defined her. The dance wasn't just a dance. It was the beginning of a new story, written step by step in the arms of a man who truly saw her. A year later, under a sky brushed with the soft gold of early summer, Clara Mae Jenkins stood beneath a blooming dogwood tree in a wedding dress she had sewn by hand. Cream lace, delicate and strong, just like her. The breeze played gently with her hem as guests gathered behind the general store, where her story with Eli Cartwright had quietly begun. He stood beside her, hands a little unsteady, eyes full of calm devotion. His gaze didn't wander. It was fixed on her like she was the only person who had ever mattered. And perhaps to him she was. Their vows were simple, spoken beneath swaying branches and the scent of wildflowers. "I never knew peace until I met you," Eli said softly, and Clara's heart, once bruised and wandering, stood still in joy. There was no grand orchestra, no preacher from out of town. Just their voices, the rustle of prairie grass, and the warmth of people who'd watched them quietly build something real. Later, they danced in the field just as they had at the spring harvest, this time, with no eyes judging, only hearts celebrating. Clara leaned into Eli's chest and whispered, "You reminded me who I already was." He kissed her forehead and replied, "And you changed my life. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was earned. Two people once broken by loss and loneliness, now whole beside one another. If you've ever felt left behind or doubted your worth, remember Clara Mae Jenkins. She didn't let rejection define her. She didn't wait for someone to fix her. She found her strength, her home, and her love not in the man who promised her a future, but in the one who quietly walked into her present and stayed." Clara Mae Jenkins was never one to chase attention, but folks in Dry Creek came to admire her the way they did the sunrise, quietly, respectfully. After all she had endured, the bitter welcome, the whispered shame, the cold rejection, Clara never lashed out, never played the victim. Instead, she stitched her life back together with grace and grit, one day at a time. She mended torn coats, baked pies with what little she had, and walked through the town square with her head held high. Over time, even the ones who once looked at her with pity began to see her for who she truly was, a woman of substance, not sorrow. Her resilience didn't make a scene. It spoke through action, through the kindness she gave, the steadiness she carried, and the warmth she offered to others without asking anything in return. She didn't need fanfare. She earned respect not by demanding it, but by embodying it. And slowly the people of Dry Creek began to shift their tune. Children waved at her from porches. Shopkeepers offered her the freshest goods. Even the whispers changed from gossip to admiration. "That's Clara," they said. "She's the one who stood tall after being left in the snow." In a time and place where reputation often determined a woman's worth, Clara carved her own. Not from beauty, nor from a man's praise, but from character. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that dignity isn't something you're given. It's something you choose to hold on to, especially when life tries to take it away.